If you've been watching the channel, you know recently I picked up the M6 Mark II as an upgrade to the entry-level Canon M50. But I am keeping both cameras for many reasons, and one of the main ones is each one of them have their own unique pros and cons. So I thought it was a perfect opportunity to pit these cameras head-to-head to take a look at how they uniquely operate when it comes to photos and video creation. So if you're someone who's looking at upgrading yourself to the M6 Mark II, or maybe you don't have either camera and you're not sure which one's right for you, well, this is the perfect video to watch, because today we're going to look at all things in depth when it comes to the Canon M50 versus the M6 Mark II. Starting off with the size and outward design of each of these cameras, you're going to start to see where the extra cost on the Mark II comes in. So although it is slightly heavier, coming in at 408 grams versus 390 grams on the M50, it is sleeker in design and more compact overall when straight out of the box. So the width of it is 4.7 inches versus the M50's 4.6 inches. The height is 2.8 inches versus the height on the M50, which is 3.5 inches. Of course, that's including the bulky EVF on the top. Similarly, the bulk of that EVF is going to come in when you're taking a look at the thickness of these cameras, as the M50 comes in at a 2.3 inch thickness versus a 1.9 inch thickness. So it's just a lot more bulky with that electric viewfinder on the top than when compared to the Mark II. Now, of course, that changes if you're going to put in that optional EVF into the hot shoe of the Mark II. And that's actually kind of awkwardly sticking out from there. So it kind of eliminates this size comparison. But if you're going to use them out of the box, this is definitely a lot slimmer overall. As we continue to look at the top here, you're going to see the next big difference in design, which is the dials that come with the Mark II. Now, the M50 has this wonderful setup with this dial in the front. You've got the modes. Combined with that dial makes it really easy to change your settings. But the Mark II does have an extra dial here where you can change the dial function with this button. And not only that, but when you come look at the back here, the four-way menu in the back is not only a four-way button, but also an additional dial. Whereas the M50, that is just a four-way button. And so you have basically two additional dials from the Mark II, and that's extremely efficient and user-friendly when you're doing something like shooting fully manual, giving you quick access to change your settings. The next huge difference is the 3-inch screen. The big difference is how they articulate. So the Mark II has a screen that can go 180 degrees up on that top hinge, and then its bottom hinge can jump down, bend down 45 degrees. So it articulates like that. It still lets you do a selfie shot, but it's going to get in the way of anything that you're going to mount onto the hot shoe. So if you get that EVF on there, maybe you mount a mic on top, that's going to be straight up in your way. Now, both of these have a pro and con that are different because, of course, the beautiful, wonderful, fantastic, vlog-friendly, fully articulating screen on the M50 gets in the way of the microphone jack on the side here. So it's extremely usable for vloggers, but it has a different set of pros and cons. Although personally, I really have enjoyed the screen on the M50, and if it was up to me, I probably would have just switched this out to the Mark II, and hey, maybe there's an idea that'll translate to future camera models. If I could just swap that screen onto the Mark II, I'd probably do it. Custom camera, man. Could you imagine? Now also, let's take a quick look at the flash. So the M50 has this pop-up flash on the top that you can utilize, and one of the really nice things about the Mark II is that it also has a pop-up flash. However, it has this nice spring design, so if you want an indirect flash, you can kind of bend it up and take a shot. Whereas the M50, you know, it's just much more static design. It can only be utilized straight on. So that's just another cool upgrade coming from the more expensive Mark II. Beyond that, a lot of the design characteristics of these two cameras are pretty much the same. Although I will say, when it comes down to loading in the battery, it is a different battery that you have to use, which is kind of annoying until you find out that the Mark II actually has improved battery life in that LP-E17 power pack compared to the LP-E12 battery pack in the M50. This is 235 shots versus 305 shots. And if you watch my videos, you know that I utilize the Wasabi Power Pack, which has an upgraded battery milliamp hour. But that difference still holds true to the aftermarket batteries, where the extended life is greater on the Mark II batteries versus on the M50 batteries. When it comes to photos, the Mark II benefits from more megapixels, coming in at 32.5 versus the M50's 24.1. And what does that mean? It means more resolution. You're going to have bigger prints available out of the Mark II, as well as more ability to crop into your photos. Now, I find that if you're a beginner photographer, you're probably not going to notice a difference in megapixels here. But if those are some considerations as far as cropping into your photos and making large prints, it's something to keep in mind when you're deciding between these two cameras. Also, depending how you shoot, you're gonna wanna keep in mind the max burst mode speed, where the M50 can come in at 10 frames per second at its max speed. However, if you wanna have continuous autofocus along with that, you gotta lower it down to 7.4 frames per second. The Mark II doesn't have that issue. It has a faster speed coming in maxed out at 14 frames per second, and that continuous autofocus is available all the way up to that speed. Another thing to consider if you're shooting something like sports, fast cars, wildlife, and things that you're gonna want that high frame rate burst mode. Now on that note, the M50 was the first EOS M camera to come out with a silent shutter mode. However, it can only be used through a preset, so you can't control things like exposure, you don't have a continuous autofocus or burst shooting, so it's just really not something that's feasible for me to use. Whereas in the Mark II, it's not handicapped like that. And not only that, the max shutter speed goes all the way up to 1/16,000th of a second compared to the standard 1/4000th of a second available in both cameras. And that newly upgraded electronic shutter technology also allows the Mark II to have a new raw burst mode that lets you shoot 18 megapixel raw files at 30 frames per second with continuous autofocus. And part of this capability comes from the Mark II's ability to support UHS 2 memory cards, which has that improved buffer performance and data transfer speed. Both cameras come with time-lapse options in video mode. However, the Mark II comes with a nice upgrade in photo modes with an interval timer option that gives you the ultimate amount of freedom in manipulating your intervals and number of shots when it comes to shooting in any photography mode. It's a welcome upgrade, as some users out there were resorting to hacking their cameras to get this option on some of the older models. When it comes to video, that's where I get super excited about the upgrade from the Mark II, because finally we have an APS-C Canon camera that can shoot 4K without that additional 1.6 crop that you find in the M50. And with a recent firmware update, we also can shoot 4K in the Mark II at 24 frames per second. And it's about time. Now that being said, if you don't need 4K, the M50 can shoot 1080p at 24 frames per second, and it looks quite good. So it really depends on if you need that extra resolution. Beyond that, also you see a decreased resolution in the M50 when it comes to that slow motion, high frame rate shot at 120 frames per second. The M50 is shooting at 720p, and the Mark II is shooting at 1080p. So again, it's what are you looking for when it comes to resolution out of your camera. It's also good to note that the eye tracking autofocus is available on the Mark II in video modes. However, on the M50, it's only available in single shot photography. So if you need that, or you like that precision when it comes to video creation, that's once again in the Mark II. And it's a good thing it has that extra battery life in comparison, because when you're shooting in 4K, it saps your battery super fast. Another thing to consider with video are these cameras' output capabilities. The M6 Mark II has clean HDMI output, which is ideal for recording high quality video externally to a recorder, or for live streaming. The M50 does not have that though, but it does have a nice USB port, and recently Canon released a webcam utility software that you can utilize with that USB port to make your M50 a webcam with your device. Now that makes it an easy decision if you know you're going to use that clean HDMI output, but if you have no interest in that, not sure what it is, the M50 is going to do a stellar job recording video to your SD card, and if you use that webcam utility software, it can be utilized on your computer as a phenomenal webcam, blowing everybody on your Zoom conferences away. Get like a fisheye lens, get your nose right on there. What's up, boss? When it comes to digital image stabilization, both these cameras have the same settings available in their menus. There has been some debate whether the Mark II has an improvement in IS. However, when I was testing these side by side, I didn't see a big difference between the Mark II and the M50. With IS enabled, it works remarkably well in both these cameras with normal camera movements. However, in the enhanced mode, which is more designed to make your camera look as if it's on a tripod for a shot, it doesn't work extremely well with panning type movements. You get kind of a wobble. Now, the debate is mostly about whether that wobble is worse on the M50 versus the Mark II. But as you can see here on this particular shot, it's about the same, and it tends to replicate exactly like that based on how well the cameraman is performing. With slow movements, if you're really meticulous about how you're moving your arms and taking a shot, that actually doesn't look that bad either from the M50 or the Mark II. But it's not really designed to replace what a gimbal can do. And you're getting an extensive crop in on that enhanced mode. There is a crop with it just enabled as well, but it's not nearly as severe. So when it comes to video making, you can rest assured that both the M50 and the Mark II are going to do a good job at stabilizing your video if you're going to utilize that in-body digital image stabilization. After all that, it may sound like I'm really harping on the M50 and pushing 100% towards the M6 Mark II, But that's not true. It's not surprising that the more expensive camera has a lot of upgrades and better technology embedded within it. That's exactly the intention of Canon, to try and push you up to the more expensive camera. At the end of the day though, if you don't need that 4K, which I'm excited about and using right now, and if you don't need that faster frame rate and some of the other upgrades within the camera, then the M50 is the phenomenal choice for you. Much cheaper, especially since it's used now. You can regularly find it used under $500, whereas the M6 Mark II's $850 without the viewfinder, right? Quite the price difference. Whereas the M50 is a phenomenal photography option and a solid video option if you're going to be shooting in 1080. That 4K just doesn't seem that usable to me. Now, if you're Mr. or Mrs. Moneybags out there and price isn't an issue at all, in that case, I suppose you might as well get the more expensive camera and the electric viewfinder, because what do you care if you're blowing money? But generally for most of us, that's not the case. And so we're looking for cost and value when it comes to what we're purchasing. So depending on what you saw and what you think your uses are with your camera, you should have a pretty easy time making a decision after this on which one of these cameras is right for you. Now, if you're interested today to check out the prices on these cameras, I'm gonna post links down in the description and comment below. I'd also like to hear your thoughts on the M50 and the M6 Mark II. Which camera do you think is the better value? Which one do you think is the right one for you? Love to hear the chatter. And beyond that, stay tuned, because I also just picked up the M200 because I was so curious seeing how these cameras come out, because I basically bought the M6 Mark II as an upgrade to the M50, but technically it was an upgrade to the M6, even though that camera is super old. And the M200 was supposed to be an upgrade to the M100, and it is, because it's definitely not an upgrade from the M50. So it's kind of like M100, M200, M50, M6 Mark II. But I thought it would be interesting to compare some of the newest releases from Canon with something as stellar as the M50, to see if there's something that might fit in better for me and better for those around me for what they might utilize as their primary camera. And the M200 is so small, so compact, holy cow. All right guys, as always, thanks for tuning in. Thanks for being subscribed. And if you're not subscribed, click that button down, because there's gonna be more to come on Drive-By Reviews.